In ancient America, power didn't always belong to the living. Across the vast and diverse pre-Columbian world, from the Mississippi Valley to the Andes and beyond, many societies revered their ancestors not merely as symbols of the past, but as active agents in the present. Kings and chiefs didn't stop ruling after death. Their presence often intensified. Their remains were displayed in rituals, consulted for decisions, and used to legitimize the authority of the living. Some were worshipped as divine figures. Others were feared as spirits whose wrath could bring ruin. This episode of Untold Secrets of Ancient America explores how the dead ruled the living, how the politics of bones, tombs, and ancestral spirits shaped the destiny of entire civilizations. These are the stories of the true kings of the dead. From burial mounds to talking skulls, we journey into the afterlife's grip on leadership, justice, and legitimacy. Join us as we uncover the eerie and powerful legacy of the dead in ancient American politics. Remembered, they ruled. In many ancient American cultures, the ancestors were woven directly into the governance of society. The political power of a chieftain, king, or priest did not die with the body. In fact, it often increased. Burial grounds of leaders became sacred centers. Their bones were venerated, and their relics were kept not in secrecy, but in ceremonial prominence. Control over a royal mummy, or the skull of a revered elder, could legitimize a successor's claim to rule. This was no symbolic gesture. It was raw political strategy. Elites commonly claimed communication with the deceased through divination, trance, or dreams. Speaking for the dead meant inheriting their authority. In societies such as the Inca, Moche, Mississippians, and even certain Northwest Coast cultures, there was no hard boundary between the living and the dead. Corpses were dressed, paraded, offered food, and even included in council meetings. The ancestor became a political entity, a figure of power whose voice echoed beyond the grave, determining who could lead, judge, or command. Across the American Midwest and Southeast, vast earthen mounds rise from the landscape: Cahokia, Etowah, Moundville. These were not just burial sites, but political centers where power radiated from beneath the soil. In Hopewell and Adena cultures, the construction of elaborate mounds was more than funerary. It was a ritual act that embedded political memory into the land itself. Archaeologists have uncovered mounds with multiple burials, layered over centuries. Central tombs were surrounded by offerings, effigies, and sacred objects, linking the buried elite to celestial and mythic forces. The dead, clad in copper, pearls, and bear claws, were positioned as divine intermediaries. These sites were never abandoned. Pilgrimages, seasonal festivals, and rites of renewal kept the memory of the dead alive. Structures like council houses, plazas, and temples were often built in alignment with these tombs. The dead were not buried and forgotten. They were political landmarks. Their presence in the landscape was a message: leadership has roots. This was necrogeography, where bones beneath the earth shaped everything above. Ancestor worship wasn't limited to rulers or grand ceremonies. It permeated daily life. Across indigenous American cultures, homes housed shrines dedicated to family ancestors. Skulls and bones were kept in niches, decorated with paint, beads, and feathers. Families invoked ancestors before meals, during rites of passage, or when seeking guidance. Among the Maya, household rituals included incense burning, food offerings, and chants. Births, marriages, and crop plantings were aligned with ancestral will. The dead weren't passive. They were protectors, advisors, and sometimes enforcers. Failing to honor one's ancestors could invite illness, bad luck, or infertility. This was a spiritual economy of mutual obligation. Among the Tlingit and Haida of the Pacific Northwest, clan identity was anchored in founding ancestors, often mythologized animals or spirits. To forget your ancestors was to erase your claim to land, leadership, and honor. Ancestor worship wasn't just spiritual, it was a political framework that defined rights, roles, and responsibilities. In ancient American cultures, human skulls were repositories of sacred power. In Mesoamerica, Tzompantli skull racks displayed both enemies and revered figures. Far from being purely macabre, these skulls served as objects of public memory and legitimacy. A skull could be a warning or a blessing. In the Andes, mummified ancestors were frequently reduced to skulls or bundled bones, then kept in family shrines. They were fed, anointed, offered coca leaves, and consulted in rituals. Some skulls were passed down through generations, their names preserved, their wisdom sought in moments of crisis. In political negotiations or land disputes, the presence of an ancestral skull was like having a living witness. In the Wari and Tiwanaku civilizations, festivals featured processions of ancestor bundles. Draped in textiles and adorned with masks, these bundles represented lineage and lore. People danced with them, wept before them, and treated them as honored guests. These relics were more than memory. They were active participants in governance, morality, and communal life. Where bones held power, they also became targets. Across ancient America, tomb theft was not just for riches, it was warfare. To desecrate an ancestor's remains was to unmake a lineage. Rival leaders would loot tombs, not only for gold, but to sever a community's spiritual roots. In the Mississippian world, conquering a chiefdom often involved the destruction of mounds and the removal of sacred relics. In Mesoamerica, enemy rulers' bones were sometimes used in sacrificial rites or displayed as trophies. The message was clear: their ancestors now serve our gods. When the Spanish invaded the Andes, they understood the power of the mummy bundles. They destroyed royal tombs and seized sacred relics to break Inca political resistance. Missionaries banned ancestor worship and burned bones. But even in the face of colonization, these practices endured underground. In many places, local people continued ancestor rites in secret, preserving ancient ties to the dead. Perhaps nowhere was the rule of the dead more institutionalized than in the Inca Empire. The royal mummies of past emperors retained their estates, servants, and political power. They were housed in palace compounds, attended to daily, and consulted during ceremonies and crises. Living rulers, including the Sapa Inca, had to share power with the mummified ancestors of former kings. Each royal lineage managed its dead sovereign's lands, creating a decentralized system where past and present rulers operated simultaneously. Political decisions required ancestral approval. Festivals such as Inti Raymi saw the parading of mummies through Cusco's streets, dressed in regal attire, seated on golden litters. Offerings were made, and their opinions interpreted by priests. This created a continuity of governance that transcended mortality, but also made reform almost impossible. Defying the dead was a heresy and a crime. This system ensured political stability, but it also bound the empire to the weight of its past. In death, rulers became more than memory. They became eternal institutions. Death was not an end. It was a coronation of a different kind. The dead shaped politics, law, and ritual. They governed from tombs, spoke through skulls, and walked again in festivals of memory and power. Understanding these ancestor cults and necropolitical systems forces us to rethink the meaning of leadership, legitimacy, and memory. These weren't cultures obsessed with death. They were cultures that understood that true power never dies. Thank you for joining us for this journey into the ancient past. If you found this episode compelling, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. And leave a comment. What hidden secrets of ancient America do you want us to uncover next? Until next time, remember, the past may be dead, but it still rules.